Driving down the highway late at night can be a peaceful experience. The quiet road, the hum of the engine, and the soft glow of headlights create a tranquil atmosphere. However, one night my peaceful drive turned into a terrifying ordeal I'll never forget. It was around midnight, and I was driving home after visiting a friend in a nearby town. The highway was deserted, and the only light came from my car's headlights. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, surrounded by dense woods. It felt like I was the only person in the world. As I drove, I noticed a faint flickering light in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another car, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old, beat-up truck parked on the side of the road. The hood was up, and the hazard lights were blinking weakly. Feeling a sense of duty to help, I pulled over and stepped out of my car. The night air was cool, and the silence was deafening. I approached the truck cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Do you need any help?" There was no response. I walked around to the front of the truck and saw a man hunched over the engine. He was wearing a dirty jacket and a worn-out hat. "Hey, do you need a hand?" I asked again. The man slowly turned to face me. His eyes were dark and hollow, and his face was pale and gaunt. A shiver ran down my spine. Something about him felt off. He didn't speak, just stared at me with those empty eyes. Feeling uneasy, I took a step back. "Do you have a phone? I can call for help," I stammered, pulling my phone from my pocket. But when I looked down at the screen, there was no signal. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. When I looked back up, the man was gone. Panic surged through me as I spun around, searching for any sign of him. "Hello?" I called out, but the only answer was the rustling of leaves in the wind. I hurried back to my car, my heart pounding. Just as I was about to get in, I heard a faint whisper. "Help me." The voice was coming from the woods. Against my better judgment, I turned towards the sound. Peering into the darkness, I could just make out a figure standing among the trees. It was a young woman, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes wide with fear. "Please help me," she whispered again, her voice trembling. I took a hesitant step towards her, but something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. The whole situation felt wrong. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. Before she could answer, a cold hand grabbed my shoulder. I whipped around to see the man from the truck. His expression twisted into a sinister grin. "You shouldn't have stopped," he hissed. Fear took over, and I shoved him away, sprinting to my car. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The man banged on the window, his face pressed against the glass, but I didn't look back. I started the car and floored it, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. My heart was racing, and my mind was a blur of fear and confusion. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man and the woman standing in the middle of the road, watching me with those hollow eyes. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of my home. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to convince myself that it was over. But that night, and many nights after, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. I could hear their whispers. I knew that I had encountered something beyond my understanding on that deserted highway. Now, I avoid driving late at night, especially on that stretch of road. The memory of that encounter haunts me, a chilling reminder that some horrors are real, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. One late night I was driving home after a long day. The road was dark and empty, and my eyelids were heavy with exhaustion. Suddenly, I noticed my gas gauge was nearing empty. I couldn't risk running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere, so I was relieved to spot a dimly lit gas station up ahead. The gas station looked old and run down, with flickering neon lights that barely illuminated the surrounding area. I pulled in and parked beside one of the pumps. The place seemed deserted, but I figured the attendant might be inside the small, shabby store. As I got out of my car, a chill ran down my spine. The air was unusually cold for a summer night, and an eerie silence surrounded the station. I walked towards the store, my footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. Inside the store, a single bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room. The shelves were half empty, and a layer of dust covered everything. Behind the counter, an old man with a haggard face and hollow eyes stared at me. His gaze was unsettling, and I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. "Need some gas?" he asked in a raspy voice. I nodded, trying to ignore the creeping fear that was growing inside me. "Yes, please." He handed me an old, rusty key attached to a wooden tag. "Pump number 3, he said, pointing outside. I took the key and went back to my car. As I started to fill the tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around but saw no one. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the pump. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper. I froze, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. I looked around frantically, but the gas station was still empty. My heart pounded in my chest, and I hurried to finish fueling. As I replaced the pump, the whispers stopped abruptly. I sighed in relief, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. I returned the key to the old man inside the store. His eyes seemed to follow my every move, making my skin crawl. "Safe travels," he said with a sinister smile as I turned to leave. I quickly got back into my car and started the engine. As I pulled out of the gas station, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My blood ran cold when I saw several shadowy figures standing near the pumps, staring at my car. They hadn't been there moments before. I sped down the dark road, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and that creepy gas station. The further I drove, the warmer the air became, and the whispers in my head slowly faded away. But the fear lingered, refusing to let go. A few miles down the road, I saw flashing lights up ahead and pulled over, thinking it was a police checkpoint. A state trooper approached my car, and I rolled down the window, my hands still trembling. "Everything all right?" he asked, shining his flashlight into the car. I stopped at a gas station back there, and it was really creepy. The trooper's face grew serious. "Gas station? There's no gas station on this stretch of road. It burned down years ago. People say it's haunted." My breath caught in my throat as his words sank in. The trooper must have seen the fear in my eyes because he added, "You're not the first to mention seeing something there. Best to avoid that place." I nodded numbly, thanking him before driving off. The rest of the journey home was a blur. When I finally reached my house, I collapsed onto my bed, still haunted by the night's events. I never took that road again, and I avoided driving late at night. The memory of the gas station and its eerie whispers stayed with me, a chilling reminder that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. I have always loved reading, so visiting the old library in my town was a regular joy for me. It was a place filled with history and mystery, and I often found myself lost among its shelves. But one day, my curiosity led me somewhere unexpected, the basement. In the dimly lit basement, hidden away from the usual hustle and bustle, I stumbled upon a forgotten section. It was dusty and filled with ancient books, their spines cracked and their pages yellowed with age. Among them, I found a peculiar book with no title. Its cover was worn and nondescript, but something about it drew me in. I opened the book cautiously, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and descriptions of dark rituals. As I read, a cold breeze seemed to sweep through the room, and faint whispers echoed in my ears. I glanced around nervously, but there was no one else there. It was as if the book itself was alive with some unseen presence. Curiosity quickly turned to fear as I realized that the book might be cursed. I hurriedly closed it and decided to take it home, hoping to understand its secrets and perhaps find a way to rid myself of its haunting influence. But bringing the book into my home was a mistake. Strange things began happening almost immediately. I heard footsteps in empty rooms and saw shadows darting across walls where there was no light. It was as if the book had brought with it a malevolent energy that now permeated my life. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I attempted to return the book to the library, only to find that the hidden section in the basement had vanished. It was as though it had never existed, leaving me alone to deal with the cursed book and its eerie consequences. In my desperation, I sought help from a local historian who specialized in occult matters. With a grave expression, he examined the book and confirmed my worst fears. It was from a forbidden collection known for harboring dark and dangerous knowledge. To break the curse, he explained, we must perform a special ritual. Together we gathered the necessary materials and performed the ritual with trembling hands. As we chanted ancient words and burned sacred herbs, the air crackled with tension. Suddenly, the cursed book emitted a blinding light and vanished in a puff of smoke. The room fell silent, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. With the book gone, the strange occurrences in my home ceased. The footsteps and shadows disappeared, leaving behind a newfound peace that I had sorely missed. I returned to the library, but I avoided the hidden sections like the plague. I had learned a valuable lesson. Some knowledge is not meant to be uncovered. It comes with a price, and delving too deeply into forbidden realms can invite darkness into one's life. The experience left me shaken but wiser. I now understood the importance of respecting boundaries, both in libraries and in life. The old adage rang true: curiosity killed the cat. Yet, despite the fear and turmoil the cursed book had caused, it had also imparted a profound lesson about the dangers of seeking forbidden knowledge. As I continued my visits to the library, I stuck to safer topics and enjoyed the company of familiar books. The memory of the cursed book lingered, a cautionary tale whispered among the shelves, a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. One summer, my friends and I decided to spend a weekend at a remote cabin deep in the woods. We were excited about the adventure, imagining nights filled with laughter around the campfire. The cabin was old but charming, surrounded by towering trees that whispered with the wind. As we arrived, we noticed the cabin looked more run-down than we expected. The wooden planks were weathered, and the windows were clouded with grime. We shrugged it off, thinking it would add to the rustic experience. That first night, we gathered around the fire pit outside, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. The night was calm, with the crackling fire and our laughter filling the air. But as the fire died down and we headed to bed, an unsettling silence settled over the cabin. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint sound. It was like a soft whisper, barely audible. I sat up, straining to listen, but the sound stopped. I shook my head, thinking it was just my imagination, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned the whispering to my friends. They laughed it off, teasing me about getting spooked by the ghost stories we had told. We spent the day hiking and exploring, enjoying the natural beauty of the area. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. This time, my friends heard them too. We all sat up, listening in fear. The whispers seemed to come from the walls surrounding us. We couldn't make out the words, but the tone was chilling. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the cabin. We jumped, our hearts pounding. The front door had slammed shut on its own. We tried to rationalize it, blaming the wind, but deep down, we knew something was wrong. Determined to figure out what was happening, we decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights, we searched the cabin from top to bottom. In the dusty attic, we found an old, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with shaky handwriting. The journal belonged to a man named William, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. His entries spoke of strange occurrences, whispers, moving shadows, and an overwhelming sense of dread. William believed the cabin was haunted by a malevolent spirit. His final entry was a desperate plea for help, written just before he vanished without a trace. A cold chill ran down my spine as I read the journal aloud. We realized that the whispers and the slamming door were not our imaginations. The cabin was haunted, just as William had warned. We decided to leave immediately. As we packed our things, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Shadows danced on the walls, flickering in the beam of our flashlights. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. We rushed to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if an invisible force was holding it shut. Panic set in as we tried to open the windows, but they were stuck too. The whispers turned into wails, filling the cabin with an unbearable noise. Suddenly the temperature dropped, and we could see our breath in the air. A shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room, slowly moving towards us. We huddled together, terrified as it came closer. Its eyes were hollow, its face twisted in agony. In a moment of desperate bravery, my friend Jake shouted at the spirit, demanding it to leave us alone. To our surprise, the figure stopped and slowly dissipated into the air. The whispers ceased, and the cabin fell silent. We didn't waste a second. The front door finally gave way, and we bolted out of the cabin, running through the woods until we reached our car. As we drove away, the cabin disappeared from view, but the terror lingered in our minds. We never spoke of that night again, each of us haunted by our own memories. The cabin in the woods remained a dark secret, a place where shadows whispered and spirits roamed. We had escaped, but the fear stayed with us, a reminder of the unseen horrors that lurk in the world. Late one Friday night, my friend Mark and I returned home from an exhausting day exploring the city. It was well past midnight when we pulled into the driveway, the moon casting eerie shadows across the garden. The house stood silent and dark, its windows reflecting the ghostly light. Mark left after dropping me off, leaving me alone to navigate the unnerving silence. As I approached the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I fumbled with my keys, my eyes darting around the garden. The wind rustled through the trees, creating unsettling shapes that danced in the corners of my vision. Each shadow seemed to reach out, grasping at the edges of my awareness. Finally inside, I locked the door behind me and exhaled a sigh of relief. The comforting hum of the refrigerator and the familiar creak of the wooden floors welcomed me. I headed straight to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, hoping to calm my nerves. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen, listening intently. It could have been the wind or perhaps an old house settling. I tried to reassure myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I turned on all the lights as I made my way through the house, each flick of the switch a small comfort. The shadows receded, but a nagging feeling of unease remained. I reached the living room and stared out the large window overlooking the garden. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a dark figure standing near the old oak tree. It was tall and motionless, blending almost seamlessly with the night. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling, and called Mark. The line rang endlessly before he finally picked up. "Hey, what's up?" he answered groggily. "Mark, there's someone in my garden," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Calm down, it's probably just your imagination," he replied, trying to soothe me. "Turn on the lights outside and take a look." Reluctantly suggested. With a click, the garden was bathed in a harsh, artificial glow. The figure was gone. I scanned every corner, every shadow, but there was no sign of anyone. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and lingering dread. "See? Nothing there," Mark said. "Get some sleep, you've had a long day." I nodded, still unconvinced, and hung up. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one before heading upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, the sensation of being watched returned, more intense than before. In my bedroom, I closed the curtains tightly and crawled into bed, leaving the bedside lamp on. Sleep was elusive, my mind replaying the events of the night. Just as I began to drift off, a soft tapping sound echoed through the room. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the window. Summoning all my courage, I crept to the window and peeked through a small gap in the curtains. My blood ran cold. The same dark figure stood directly outside, closer than before. Its features were obscured, but I could feel its eyes boring into me. The tapping continued, each tap like a countdown. I stumbled back, reaching for my phone to call Mark again. But before I could dial, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. The tapping stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I huddled in the corner of my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline, its screen the only source of light. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, listening to the deafening quiet. Finally, the power flickered back on, and the house hummed to life. Cautiously, I approached the window once more. The figure was gone. I checked the garden, but it was empty. Shaken, I spent the rest of the night wide awake, every creak and groan of the house amplified in my ears. Morning light brought a fragile sense of safety, but as I stepped outside, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. Etched into the dirt beneath my window were the words, "I'll be back." Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. Photography was more than a hobby for me. It was a passion that led me to discover hidden places and capture their stories through my lens. One day, while exploring deep in the woods, I stumbled upon an old cemetery, forgotten by time and overgrown with moss. The air hung heavy with silence, and the tombstones stood as weathered sentinels of the past. Intrigued by the eerie tranquility of the place, I began taking photographs. But as I reviewed the pictures later, I noticed something unsettling. Strange ghostly figures seemed to appear in the background of some shots. They were faint and ethereal, like whispers captured in light. A chill ran down my spine, but curiosity drove me to continue exploring. As I wandered deeper into the cemetery, drawn by an unseen force, I heard soft, plaintive cries echoing through the stillness. Following the sound, I stumbled upon a small, neglected grave nestled under the shade of an ancient tree. The tombstone was weathered and worn, the name barely discernible, but the words, "Forgotten Child," were etched into the stone. A wave of profound sadness washed over me as I realized the tragedy of the forgotten child laid to rest in this secluded place. Without hesitation, I knelt beside the grave, brushing away years of neglect and placing fresh flowers as a token of remembrance. As I did, a cold sensation gripped my shoulder, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through my being. I turned, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was only the whispering wind among the trees. That night, sleep eluded me as my mind replayed the haunting encounter with the forgotten child. Unable to shake the feeling that there was more to the story, I delved into research, scouring old archives and newspapers. And there, in faded ink and yellowed pages, I uncovered the heartbreaking truth. The child had met a tragic fate, and their family, burdened by poverty, could not afford a proper burial. Moved by the injustice of their untold story, I resolved to bring closure to the forgotten child. With the support of the local community, I organized a small memorial service at the cemetery. People came together, drawn by a shared empathy for the child who had slipped through the cracks of history. Together we stood in quiet reverence, honoring the life that had been overlooked for so long. As we paid our respects and bid farewell, a sense of peace settled over the cemetery. The ghostly figures that had haunted my photographs no longer appeared. It was as though by acknowledging the forgotten child and sharing their story, we had lifted a veil of unrest that had lingered for years. Walking away from the cemetery that day, I carried with me a profound sense of fulfillment. Through my photographs in the memorial service, I had given voice to a silent tragedy, offering the forgotten child the recognition and dignity they deserved. It was a reminder of the power of empathy and compassion, and the healing that comes from acknowledging and honoring the past. The experience left an indelible mark on my heart, shaping my perspective on life and the importance of remembering those who have been overlooked or forgotten. And though the cemetery remained nestled in the quiet depths of the woods, its atmosphere had shifted, no longer haunted but serene, as if the spirits of the past had found peace at last. In the heart of the dense forest, where sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick canopy of ancient trees, lay a darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself. It was a place of serenity by day, where the rustling leaves and chirping birds created a symphony of nature. But by nightfall, the forest took on a different character, one that whispered of secrets and shadows. I've always been drawn to the mystique of the forest. Its towering trees and winding trails offered solace and inspiration. On a cool autumn afternoon, I ventured deeper than usual, camera in hand, eager to capture the beauty that lay hidden in the gloom. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized I had ventured into unfamiliar territory. The once familiar landmarks were obscured by an eerie darkness, and a chill settled in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. Pushing aside a creeping unease, I pressed on, guided by the beam of my flashlight. The comforting rustle of leaves now sounded like hushed whispers, and shadows danced eerily among the trees. Then I saw it, a faint glow emanating from deeper within the forest, beckoning me forward. Curiosity mingled with trepidation as I quickened my pace, navigating through dense underbrush and over gnarled roots. The air grew heavy with a scent, an unidentifiable mixture of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood. Despite the warmth of exertion, goosebumps prickled my skin. Emerging into a small clearing, I found myself standing before a circle of ancient stones, moss-covered and weathered by time. Within the circle, a soft luminescence pulsed, casting a ghostly glow upon the surroundings. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously, sensing an otherworldly energy permeating the air. The stones formed a makeshift altar adorned with wilted flowers and half-burned candles. The ground beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with a presence, and a sense of dread washed over me. Suddenly, a low guttural growl echoed through the clearing, freezing me in place. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip, but the shadows swallowed the sound. Fear gripped me like icy fingers, urging me to flee. A figure emerged from the darkness, a silhouette cloaked in tattered robes, eyes gleaming with an eerie light. I stumbled backward, mind racing with disbelief and terror. The figure moved closer, flickering like a wraith in the moonlight. In a panic, I sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at my clothes and underbrush snagging my ankles. The figure's unearthly laughter echoed behind me, taunting and relentless. Tears blurred my vision as I fought to stay upright, heart pounding in sync with my frantic footsteps. Just as I felt I could run no further, I burst into a familiar clearing. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Gasping for breath, I collapsed, trembling with exhaustion and fear. Hours passed before I dared to move, cautiously retracing my steps back to civilization. The forest seemed quiet now, the malevolent presence gone with the dawn. I emerged onto the trailhead, greeted by the first rays of morning sunlight breaking through the canopy above. I never spoke of what I encountered that night in the depths of the forest. The memory haunted my dreams, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath nature's beauty. Since then, I've avoided venturing into the woods alone, forever changed by the encounter that shattered my sense of security in the wilds. It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone, savoring the peace and solitude. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in charge of the house. I had just finished dinner and settled on the couch to watch a movie. The neighborhood was eerily silent, as it usually was. My neighbor's house, which had been empty for 15 years, added to the stillness. The once vibrant home now stood as a hollow reminder of the past, its windows dark and its lawn overgrown. As midnight approached, I felt a growing sense of unease. The movie I was watching didn't help. It was a horror film filled with jump scares and eerie sounds. I was on edge, but I told myself it was just the movie playing tricks on my mind. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I paused the movie and sat still, listening. Maybe I had imagined it, but then it came again, a firm knock, echoing through the silent house. I stood up and cautiously approached the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered through the peephole. To my surprise, no one was there. I opened the door slightly, just enough to look outside. The porch was empty, and the street was deserted. I stepped out, looking around. There was no sign of anyone. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, I went back inside and locked the door. Maybe it was some kids playing a prank, I thought, trying to reassure myself. I returned to the couch and resumed the movie, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to the knock. It didn't make sense. Just as I was starting to relax again, I heard it. Another knock, this time louder and more insistent. Fear gripped me as I approached the door once more. This time I turned on the porch light before looking through the peephole. Again, no one was there. I opened the door and stepped outside, my eyes scanning the darkness. The night was still, with only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. Suddenly, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door of the empty house next door was slightly ajar. It had been locked tight for years, and no one had been inside since the previous owners had left. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could be there, and why now? I grabbed my phone and called my parents. They tried to calm me down, suggesting it might be a squatter or an animal. But deep down, I felt something more sinister was at play. I decided to call the police. When they arrived, I explained what had happened. 2 officers entered the empty house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I watched from my porch, my heart in my throat. After what felt like an eternity, they returned. "There's no one inside," one of the officers said, "but it looks like someone's been there recently. We'll keep an eye on the place." The police left, and I was left standing on my porch, staring at the house next door. The door was closed now, but the sense of unease remained. I went back inside, double-checked all the locks, and decided to sleep with the lights on. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next morning, I spoke to a few neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Days turned into weeks, and the incident became a distant memory. But every time I walked past that empty house, I couldn't help but feel a chill. The knock on my door remained a mystery, one that would haunt me for years to come. I would often lie awake at night, listening to every creak and whisper, half expecting to hear that firm knock again. Despite the passage of time, the eerie stillness of that night and the unanswered questions left a lingering sense of dread, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved. I worked as a night guard at an old factory where the quiet and solitude suited me well. One evening, something happened that made my heart race. At the end of a hallway, I saw a ghostly figure, a woman in a white dress, her face pale and sorrowful. I approached her, hoping to understand what I was seeing, but she disappeared right before my eyes. Startled and shaken, I told my boss about it the next day. He chuckled and said it was probably a prank or my imagination running wild. "Don't worry about it," he assured me. "This place is old, and old places tend to have stories." But the figure didn't stop appearing. Every night, at the same time and in the same spot, she would reappear, looking at me with mournful eyes. Determined to uncover the truth behind this haunting, I decided to investigate the factory's history. I spent hours digging through records and archives. Eventually, I learned that the factory had been built on the grounds of an old mansion that had tragically burned down decades ago. A woman named Elizabeth had died in that fire. It dawned on me that the ghostly figure I had been seeing was Elizabeth's spirit, restless and seeking peace. I wanted to help her, so I dug deeper into her story. I discovered that Elizabeth's fiancé had started the fire to collect insurance money. It was a heartbreaking betrayal that had cost Elizabeth her life. With newfound determination, I tracked down the descendants of Elizabeth's fiancé. I told them about Elizabeth's tragic fate and how her spirit was still haunting the factory. They were shocked by the story and deeply moved. They agreed that Elizabeth deserved peace and closure. Together, we organized a memorial for Elizabeth at the factory. It was a small gathering, but it was filled with heartfelt words and remembrance for Elizabeth. We placed flowers at the site where the mansion had once stood, honoring her memory and acknowledging the injustice she had suffered. After the memorial, something remarkable happened. The ghostly figure of Elizabeth stopped appearing. It was as if she had finally found peace, knowing that her story had been acknowledged and honored. I felt a sense of relief and accomplishment, knowing that I had helped a lost soul find peace. Although I continued my job as a night guard, the factory no longer felt haunted. It became a place of quiet and history, with Elizabeth's spirit finally at rest. But I never forgot Elizabeth and her haunting presence. Her story stayed with me as a reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of seeking justice, even for those who are no longer with us. In the quiet nights at the factory, I often thought about Elizabeth and hoped that she had found the peace she had long sought. Her memory became a part of the place, a testament to the enduring power of stories and the impact they can have on those who hear them. It was supposed to be an exciting weekend of camping. My friends and I had planned the trip for weeks, choosing a remote spot deep in the woods, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The forest we chose was known for its beauty, but also for the eerie tales surrounding it. They called it the Haunted Forest, but we were skeptical and eager for adventure. We arrived in the late afternoon, set up our tents, and gathered around a campfire. The sun was setting, casting long shadows among the trees. We cooked dinner, laughed, and told stories. As night fell, the forest became a dark, silent entity, broken only by the crackling of our fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. Feeling brave, one of my friends, Jake, suggested we share ghost stories. We agreed, trying to outdo each other with tales of terror. When it was my turn, I recounted the legend of the haunted forest. Years ago, I began, a young couple went camping here. They were never seen again. Some say their spirits still wander the forest, seeking help, but those who encounter them are never the same. The group laughed nervously, but a sense of unease settled over us. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows around our campsite. We decided to call it a night and retreated to our tents. I had trouble falling asleep. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified in the darkness. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and an occasional distant owl hooting kept me on edge. I finally drifted off, only to be awakened by a soft whispering sound. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but the whispers grew louder and seemed to come from all around. I unzipped my tent and peeked out. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, and the forest was pitch black. I saw movement near the edge of our campsite, a shadowy figure slipping between the trees. My heart raced. I called out softly, "Jake? Sarah, is that you?" There was no response. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it towards the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dense forest. The whispering continued, more insistent now, like voices just out of earshot. I woke Jake and Sarah, explaining what I had seen and heard. They groggily followed me out of their tents, and we stood together, listening. The whispers seemed to come closer, surrounding us. Jake, always the brave one, suggested we investigate. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the forest. The trees closed in around us, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. My flashlight flickered and I felt a chill run down my spine. We stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center stood an old, decrepit cabin. It looked abandoned, with broken windows and a sagging roof. The whispers seemed to be coming from inside. Against my better judgment, we approached the cabin. The door creaked open with a nudge from Jake. We stepped inside, our flashlights revealing dusty furniture and cobwebs. The whispers were louder now, almost as if they were in the room with us. We explored the cabin, finding nothing but decay and darkness. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. We turned to see her staring at a mirror on the wall. Reflected in the glass were not just our faces, but the faint outlines of two other figures, their expressions sad and pleading. We ran out of the cabin, through the forest, and back to our campsite. The whispers followed us, growing fainter as we reached the safety of our tents. We huddled together, too scared to sleep, waiting for the first light of dawn. When morning finally came, we packed up and left the haunted forest as quickly as we could. The memory of those whispers and the figures in the mirror haunted us. We never spoke of that night again, but the forest left a mark on us, a reminder of the unseen horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of the light. It was a chilly Saturday evening, and the house felt especially empty. My father and sister had gone to attend our cousin's wedding in a nearby town, but I had opted to stay home. I wasn't keen on weddings, and our house, despite being old and creaky, always provided a sense of comfort and solitude. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the old wooden floors, I settled in with a book in the living room. The wind outside howled through the gaps in the window frames, making the house groan and creak even more than usual. I shivered slightly, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, and tried to lose myself in the story. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, its eerie echo resonating through the house. I glanced at the time, surprised at how quickly the evening had flown by. I decided to make a cup of tea to warm myself up. As I walked to the kitchen, the floorboards creaked under my feet, a familiar sound in this ancient house. The kitchen light flickered as I entered, casting fleeting shadows on the walls. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, the faint hiss of gas adding to the ambient noise. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from upstairs. I froze, heart pounding. The house was old, sure, but that sound was too deliberate to be the usual settling noises. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer, its beam piercing through the darkness as I made my way to the staircase. The steps creaked with each movement, and the air grew colder the higher I went. Reaching the top, I paused, listening for any further sounds. All was silent. I checked each room methodically, starting with my father's study. The door creaked open, revealing the cluttered space within. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents casting strange shadows in the flashlight's beam. Nothing seemed out of place. I moved on to my sister's room and then mine, both equally silent and undisturbed. Finally, I reached the attic door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, which was unusual. My father always kept it closed and locked. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed it open, revealing the dark, musty space beyond. The beam of my flashlight caught dust particles floating in the air, and the smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled my nostrils. As I stepped inside, a cold draft swept through the attic, making me shiver. I scanned the room with the flashlight, its beam bouncing off old trunks and discarded furniture. Suddenly, the light caught something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. I gasped, dropping the flashlight. It hit the floor and rolled, casting erratic shadows around the room. I scrambled to pick it up, heart pounding in my chest. When I shone the light back on the corner, the figure was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I backed out of the attic, slamming the door shut behind me. I hurried back downstairs, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? The logical part of me insisted it was just a trick of the light, but my gut told me otherwise. I decided to call my father, hoping for some reassurance. As I reached for my phone, the lights flickered again, and then the power went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled with my phone, using its dim screen light to navigate. Just as I was about to dial, I heard the sound of footsteps downstairs, slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me. I locked myself in my room, my mind racing for an explanation. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside my door. I held my breath, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Minutes passed in agonizing silence, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The power flickered back on, and the house was once again bathed in the soft glow of electric light. I cautiously opened my door and found nothing but empty hallway. The sense of dread lingered, though. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, my father and sister returned. I recounted the night's events, but they dismissed it as a vivid nightmare or an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had experienced. The house, old and creaky, held secrets in its shadows, and someone had made their presence known to me. Once, I worked as a night guard at an old prison. The prison had a dark history, known for its gallows where many criminals had been executed. The gallows were no longer used, but they still stood in the courtyard, a grim reminder of the past. One cold winter night, I was doing my rounds. The prison was quiet, and most of the inmates were asleep. As I passed by the courtyard, I felt a chill in the air, colder than usual. I glanced at the gallows and shivered. Something about them always gave me the creeps. I continued my patrol, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked past the courtyard, I felt eyes on me. I tried to ignore it and focus on my duties. Around midnight, the power went out. The prison was plunged into darkness, and my flashlight was my only source of light. I radioed for help, but the other guards were busy trying to restore the power. I had to check the courtyard and make sure everything was secure. I stepped into the courtyard, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The gallows loomed ahead, casting long shadows. As I approached, I heard a faint creaking sound, like wood bending under weight. My heart started to race. I shone my flashlight on the gallows and froze. The noose was swaying gently, as if someone had just been hanged, but there was no one there. The rope moved on its own, creaking in the silent night. I backed away slowly, trying to calm my nerves. Then, I heard a whisper. It was so soft, I almost didn't catch it. "Help me," the voice said. I spun around, but no one was there. The courtyard was empty. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." It was coming from the gallows. My flashlight flickered, and I saw a ghostly figure standing on the platform. It was a man, his face pale and eyes hollow. He wore old prison clothes and a noose hung around his neck. "Please," he whispered, reaching out to me. "Help me." I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The ghost stepped off the platform, but instead of falling, he floated towards me. His eyes were filled with sorrow and pain. "I was innocent," he said, "executed for a crime I didn't commit. You must help me find peace." I finally found my voice. "How can I help you?" "Tell the world my story," he replied. "Prove my innocence." The power suddenly came back on, and the ghost vanished. I stood there, shaken, trying to process what had just happened. I knew I had to do something. The next day, I started researching the prison's history. I found records of an inmate named Thomas who had been executed 50 years ago. He had always claimed he was innocent, but no one believed him. I dug deeper, finding old newspaper articles and court records. It took months, but I finally uncovered new evidence that proved Thomas was telling the truth. He had been wrongly accused and executed for a crime he didn't commit. I contacted the authorities and shared my findings. In the process, Thomas was posthumously exonerated. His name was cleared, and his story was told. The night after the announcement, I was back on duty. As I passed the courtyard, I felt a sense of peace. I glanced at the gallows and saw a faint, ghostly figure. It was Thomas, smiling at me. He nodded, then slowly faded away. The prison felt different after that night. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the gallows no longer felt haunted. I knew Thomas had found peace, and I had played a part in it. The memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder of the injustice that can happen and the ghosts that remain until their stories are told.